The day our greatest military strategist attended a soccer match, the Galactic Council unknowingly canceled a war that had been planned for 2 centuries. Commander Lysera had crossed collapsing stars, negotiated with civilizations older than recorded time, and dismantled the defense doctrines of 12 expanding empires without firing a single shot. Across the known galaxy, her name was spoken with quiet respect, not because she commanded the largest fleets, but because she understood how civilizations thought. Every campaign began the same way. She never studied weapons first. She studied culture. Culture created habits. Habits shaped decisions. Decisions determined victory long before soldiers ever stepped onto a battlefield. That philosophy had never failed her. It was the same principle taught inside every Galactic Council academy. Long before diplomats studied governments or admirals analyzed fleets, cultural strategists examined the games a civilization loved most. Games revealed what laws often concealed. They exposed how strangers learned trust, how leaders earned loyalty, how failure was accepted, and what people willingly sacrificed for one another. Every advanced civilization unknowingly encoded its deepest values into recreation. If Lysera wanted to understand humanity before anyone else, she would not begin inside a war room. She would begin where billions of humans gathered by choice. Earth was supposed to become another predictable equation. Humanity had reached the interstellar stage faster than almost every species in the Council's archives. Their technological acceleration defied conventional models. Their economic adaptability bordered on irrational. Their political systems contradicted one another, yet somehow continued functioning. Worse still, every simulation designed to forecast humanity's long-term expansion produced wildly inconsistent outcomes. Some projected peaceful cooperation. Others predicted unstoppable dominance. None agreed. The Council demanded answers, and Lysera volunteered without hesitation. She expected another ordinary assignment. Primitive emotions. Fragmented governments. Competitive instincts waiting to be exploited. The shuttle descended through bright afternoon clouds, and sunlight spilled across an enormous stadium that looked less like architecture and more like a living heartbeat. More than 70,000 people filled every seat. Waves of color rolled across the stands. Flags moved like oceans beneath the wind. Drums echoed through steel beams. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Elderly couples smiled beside teenagers whose faces were painted in bright national colors. Thousands of strangers stood shoulder to shoulder as though they had known one another their entire lives. Lysera remained motionless behind the transparent observation glass of the diplomatic suite. Her translator quietly processed hundreds of languages, accents, chants, and songs until they blended into one overwhelming sound. It was not chaos. It was not discipline. It was something in between. Then the music began. Without command. Without synchronization devices. Without neural links. Tens of thousands of human voices rose together, carrying the same melody into the open sky. Some sang perfectly. Others missed every note. None seemed embarrassed. The imperfections somehow made the sound stronger. Lysera frowned almost imperceptibly. Her wrist display immediately searched for the conductor responsible for coordinating the crowd. No signal appeared. She expanded the scan radius. Nothing. She checked for subliminal frequencies, pheromone synchronization, localized broadcast pulses, hidden military communication networks. Every result returned negative. The crowd simply chose to sing together. She had witnessed perfectly synchronized choirs engineered through quantum resonance on worlds where citizens shared collective consciousness. This was different. These humans possessed independent minds, conflicting beliefs, separate lives, and countless personal struggles. Yet for a few extraordinary minutes, they breathed together as if connected by invisible gravity. Her analytical software highlighted the statistical impossibility in quiet blue letters across her display. Shared emotional synchronization without biological linkage. Confidence level, unexplained. The players finally emerged from the tunnel below, and the entire stadium erupted into thunderous applause that vibrated through the reinforced glass beneath Lysera's fingertips. She looked away from the field and studied the audience instead. A firefighter embraced a businessman wearing rival colors. A young girl handed half her popcorn to a stranger. Two veterans laughed while comparing old team scarves faded by decades of loyalty. None of those interactions served an obvious strategic purpose. None increased survival probability. None improved military readiness. Yet every gesture seemed instinctive. Lysera slowly recorded her first official observation for the council. Subject: humanity. Initial conclusion: I may have been studying the wrong battlefield. Lucas Bennett preferred arriving at the stadium 3 hours before kickoff, long before the cameras found their angles and long before the crowd reached full voice. To him, the quiet hours revealed more truth than the 90 minutes everyone paid to watch. The maintenance crews carefully painted fresh white lines across the grass with almost ceremonial precision. Volunteers inspected every seat. Young staff members laughed while carrying boxes of bottled water through endless concrete corridors. Groundskeepers walked slowly across the field, gently replacing loose patches of turf with the kind of patience usually reserved for priceless works of art. Nothing about it looked glamorous, yet every person behaved as though the smallest responsibility mattered. Lucas stood near midfield wearing a simple navy jacket embroidered with the crest of the United States Soccer Federation. At 36 years old, his blonde hair had begun surrendering to a few silver strands near his temples, and years of military service had left a permanent calm in his posture. Before becoming one of America's most respected tactical analysts, he had spent nearly a decade as a Navy intelligence officer, where he learned that victories rarely belonged to the loudest commander. They belonged to the person who noticed details everyone else ignored. That reputation had eventually brought him to an unusual assignment. The Department of Interstellar Relations wanted someone capable of explaining humanity through something other than politics or military history. Lucas had laughed when they first suggested soccer. He stopped laughing after reading Commander Lysera's biography. She had successfully predicted rebellions before they happened. She had prevented wars by identifying cultural weaknesses invisible to artificial intelligence. If anyone could understand humanity, it would be her. If anyone could misunderstand humanity completely, it would also be her. A quiet chime echoed through the hallway behind him. Lucas turned as the security doors opened without a sound. Lysera entered accompanied by only 2 diplomatic observers, both remaining several respectful steps behind her. She wore no elaborate armor, only an elegant silver uniform woven from unfamiliar material that reflected daylight like calm water. Her movements carried extraordinary precision. Every glance appeared measured. Every breath seemed intentionally controlled. She stopped near the edge of the field, watching workers install the final corner flag. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Lucas decided to break the silence first. "Good morning, Commander." Her luminous eyes shifted toward him with calm curiosity. "You are Lucas Bennett." "That is correct. Your records indicate extensive military experience. Yet you now study athletic competition." Lucas smiled. "Sometimes they are not as different as they appear." She observed him for another moment before activating a small holographic display above her wrist. "I reviewed 7,412 professional matches before arriving on Earth. I have calculated optimal formations, passing efficiency, energy expenditure, spatial occupation, and probability trees for every tactical variation used during the last 30 years. Lucas nodded politely. "That sounds impressive. The data reveals persistent irrationality. Human teams repeatedly ignore mathematically superior decisions." "They do. Why?" Lucas looked toward a little boy helping his father tape a homemade banner across the front row. The letters were uneven. One corner hung lower than the other. The father laughed, and together they adjusted it until the child smiled with unmistakable pride. Lucas pointed toward them instead of answering immediately. "Tell me, Commander, which one of them made the mistake?" Lysera followed his gesture. "The banner is imperfect." "Exactly." Then the child. Lucas shook his head gently. "That depends on what you think they came here to accomplish." For the first time since arriving on Earth, Commander Lysera hesitated before speaking. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but to someone who studied people for a living, 2 seconds felt like the opening move of an entirely different game. Lysera spent the first half exactly as she had planned. Her analytical interface projected invisible grids across the field, dividing every blade of grass into measurable sectors. Colored vectors traced each player's movement, while probability curves adjusted thousands of times every minute. Every sprint, every pass, every change of direction became another variable inside an expanding mathematical model. The match itself was remarkably ordinary by human standards. One team favored possession while the other relied on rapid counterattacks. Passing lanes opened and disappeared in fractions of a second. Defenders shifted in disciplined lines before collapsing toward the center whenever pressure increased. Her software admired the geometry. The players, however, refused to obey it. Again and again, they abandoned statistically superior decisions. A midfielder ignored an obvious passing lane to encourage a younger teammate to make the play himself. A veteran striker slowed his own run to create space for someone else. Even the goalkeeper applauded a defender after an imperfect clearance instead of displaying frustration. The numbers continued falling apart. Expected efficiency decreased. Emotional stability increased. Her processors marked another contradiction. During halftime, the stadium transformed almost instantly. Thousands of spectators stood in line for food. Families laughed beneath bright concession lights. Children chased one another through concrete corridors wearing oversized jerseys that reached almost to their knees. Everywhere Lysera looked, strangers smiled at strangers. Lucas quietly walked beside her without interrupting her observations. Eventually she spoke. Your species accepts repeated inefficiency. Lucas glanced toward a volunteer helping an elderly man climb several steps while missing the beginning of the second half. That depends on what you believe success looks like. Winning is success. Sometimes, your athletes reduce their own probability of victory. Sometimes they do. Why would intelligent competitors willingly lower their advantage? Lucas bought 2 cups of coffee from a nearby stand and handed one toward her before remembering she did not consume human beverages. He smiled awkwardly and accepted the mistake with quiet humor instead of embarrassment. Lysera noticed several nearby spectators chuckle warmly rather than mock him. Another unexpected response. He placed the untouched cup beside him and leaned against the railing overlooking the field. Commander, what happens when one of your officers makes an error? We identify the cause and correct future performance. Publicly, naturally. Precision requires accountability. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. Here, mistakes matter. But people matter more. She studied his expression carefully. There was no trace of deception. No diplomatic performance. He genuinely believed those words. The second half began with renewed intensity. Midway through the game, a young substitute entered the field. His movements lacked confidence. Within minutes, he misplaced an easy pass that allowed the opposing team to create a dangerous opportunity. A disappointed groan rolled through the stadium before quickly fading. Lysera expected visible anger from his teammates. Instead, the captain jogged across the field, placed a reassuring hand on the young player's shoulder, smiled briefly, and pointed toward open space for the next attack. The crowd responded by applauding louder than before. The substitute straightened his posture. His next touch was calmer. Then another. Gradually his confidence returned. Lysera replayed the sequence 6 times through her internal recorder. Every predictive combat model she had ever developed recommended isolating unreliable individuals to preserve operational effectiveness. Humanity had just demonstrated the opposite approach in front of 70,000 witnesses. They had invested emotional energy into the weakest performer instead of abandoning him. Her display generated another alert. Collective confidence recovery exceeded projected values by 38%. She quietly disabled the notification. For the first time since beginning the mission, she realized her software was no longer helping her understand humanity. It was preventing her from seeing what every person inside the stadium considered completely obvious. The final whistle echoed beneath the evening sky, but almost nobody hurried toward the exits. Thousands remained in their seats, applauding both teams with equal warmth as players exchanged jerseys, embraced old rivals, and thanked supporters who had stood singing for nearly 2 hours. Lysera watched the celebration with growing uncertainty. According to every strategic doctrine preserved within the Galactic Council, competition should reinforce division. Victors celebrated. Defeated forces withdrew. Emotional separation preserved hierarchy. Yet the humans behaved as though the contest itself had strengthened everyone involved. Lucas waited patiently beside the railing until the stadium slowly emptied. Would you like to see where the real lessons happen? He asked. Lysera turned toward him. The match has concluded. Exactly. He led her through quiet service corridors that smelled faintly of fresh paint, cut grass, and brewed coffee. Cleaning crews swept discarded programs into neat piles, while volunteers folded banners with the same care they had shown before kickoff. No one complained about staying late. A young employee noticed an elderly janitor struggling with a heavy equipment case and silently took one side of the handle. Neither expected recognition. Neither looked around to see whether anyone was watching. Lysra recorded the interaction automatically before stopping the recording halfway through. She was beginning to realize that if she documented every small act of cooperation, she would never finish her report. They eventually reached the home locker room. The loud celebration she expected never arrived. Instead, quiet conversations filled the room. Players removed muddy boots while trainers inspected tired muscles and distributed water bottles. The captain who had encouraged the nervous substitute earlier sat beside the young player, replaying several moments from the match on a digital tablet. There was no criticism in his voice. He pointed to open passing lanes, smiled when the younger athlete recognized his own mistake, and finished by patting him gently on the shoulder. The substitute laughed at himself before promising to improve. Across the room, another veteran quietly handed his commemorative match ball to a rookie who had made his first international appearance. Cameras were gone. Reporters had already left. There was no audience left to impress. Lucas folded his arms. "This is why I wanted you here." Lysra remained silent. "Out there," he continued, gesturing toward the empty stadium, "they compete. In here, they build tomorrow." She slowly walked farther into the room, observing photographs covering one wall. Championship victories appeared beside heartbreaking defeats. Injured players stood beside healthy teammates. Retired coaches smiled beside children who had later become professionals. The timeline stretched across decades. Individual careers ended. The team continued. Her gaze settled on a framed sentence mounted above the exit door. "No one is bigger than the crest." She read it twice before asking. "The symbol is more valuable than the individual?" Lucas considered the question carefully. "Not exactly. The crest reminds us that every generation borrows something from the people before them and leaves something for the people after them." Lysra looked back toward the photographs. Faces changed. Uniforms changed. Even the stadium had changed. Only the shared purpose remained. Her civilization admired perfection. Humanity appeared to admire continuity. That distinction seemed almost insignificant until she realized its strategic implications. A society built around perfect individuals weakened whenever those individuals disappeared. A society built around passing responsibility forward could survive almost indefinitely. She quietly activated her wrist display and opened a classified simulation template. For the first time, she entered a new operational variable that had never existed inside galactic military doctrine. She labeled it with two simple human words she had heard repeated throughout the day: team spirit. Her system immediately responded with an unexpected message. Variable cannot be quantified. Lysra stared at the screen for several long seconds before closing it without attempting another calculation. The following morning, Lucas did not drive Lysra toward another professional stadium. Instead, they left the city skyline behind, following quiet suburban roads where maple trees cast shifting shadows across narrow streets. Morning dew still clung to neighborhood parks, and the cool autumn air carried the familiar scent of freshly cut grass mixed with warm coffee drifting from nearby houses. After nearly 40 minutes, Lucas parked beside a modest community soccer complex surrounded by simple chain-link fences. There were no television cameras, no luxury suites, no national flags, only 4 small fields stretching beneath a bright blue sky where children chased soccer balls with boundless energy. Lysra looked around in visible confusion. "This is not a professional competition." "No," Lucas answered with a gentle smile. "This is where everything begins." Parents unfolded lawn chairs along the sidelines while younger brothers and sisters played catch nearby. Volunteers carried orange cones across the grass. A retired couple worked quietly at a small concession stand, arranging homemade cookies beside insulated containers of hot chocolate. Nobody appeared to receive payment. Nobody seemed interested in status. Everyone simply found something useful to do. A whistle sounded, and 2 teams of children no older than 10 ran onto the field wearing oversized uniforms that hung loosely around their shoulders. Their movements lacked the precision of elite athletes, but every face carried unmistakable excitement. Lysra activated her observational scanner almost automatically before stopping herself. Instead, she chose to watch with her own eyes. Early in the match, one small defender stumbled while attempting to intercept the ball. His mistake allowed the opposing team to score. The boy lowered his head immediately, his shoulders collapsing beneath disappointment. Silence settled briefly across the field. Lysra anticipated frustration from teammates and criticism from adults. Instead, something entirely different unfolded. Before the game restarted, every player on the boys' team walked toward him. One teammate adjusted the boy's shin guard that had slipped loose during the fall. Another handed him the captain's armband for the next few minutes. Their goalkeeper jogged the entire length of the field simply to offer a high five. Along the sideline, parents from both teams applauded together. No one shouted blame. No one demanded perfection. Lucas quietly folded his hands inside his jacket pockets. Watch what happens next. The young defender took a deep breath and returned to position. Minutes later, he intercepted a pass cleanly before sending the ball forward to begin an attack that eventually led to an equalizing goal. The loudest cheers came not because the team had scored, but because the same child who had made the earlier mistake was smiling again. Lysra felt an unfamiliar hesitation settle into her thoughts. The objective changed, she murmured almost to herself. Lucas nodded. Did it? She watched families embracing after both teams left the field. Victorious children congratulated defeated opponents. Coaches shook hands while discussing school schedules rather than final scores. One little girl traded team pins with a player she had spent the entire game trying to stop. Commander, Lucas said softly, we teach children the rules of soccer. But whether they become decent human beings depends on moments like these. Lysra slowly looked across dozens of neighboring fields where hundreds of similar matches unfolded at the same time. Different uniforms. Different families, different communities, yet the same quiet patterns repeated everywhere. Encouragement after mistakes, shared responsibility, joy without guarantees, competition without hatred. She realized none of those values had been ordered by governments or enforced by law. They emerged naturally through countless ordinary weekends across an entire civilization. As sunlight reflected across the fields, Lysra opened a blank page inside her classified mission journal and wrote a sentence she never imagined recording. Humanity does not preserve resilience through military academies alone. It begins teaching resilience to its children before they are old enough to understand the word. Over the next several days, Lucas stopped explaining soccer altogether. Instead, he simply invited Lysra to observe wherever the game naturally existed. They visited a crowded public park in Chicago where office workers removed their jackets during lunch breaks to play short matches on worn grass before returning to meetings with muddy shoes and broad smiles. They traveled to a small farming town in Kansas where teenagers practiced beneath aging floodlights long after sunset because the nearest proper field was almost 30 miles away. They walked through a military training base in Virginia where young service members ended exhausting drills by passing a soccer ball across cracked pavement, laughing with the same energy they had displayed as children. Later that week, aboard an orbital research station circling Earth, Lysra found astronauts floating inside a low-gravity recreation module, gently guiding a specially designed soccer ball through the air while cheering every successful pass regardless of which nation the players represented. The locations changed. The people changed. Their professions, incomes, religions, and political beliefs rarely matched. Yet the invisible pattern remained perfectly consistent. Everywhere she looked, the game became less about the ball and more about the people surrounding it. One rainy afternoon, Lucas led her into an aging neighborhood where apartment buildings overlooked a small concrete court surrounded by faded chain-link fencing. The painted lines had nearly disappeared beneath years of weather. One goal leaned slightly to the left, held together by fresh bolts beside rust that had survived decades. A group of children wearing mismatched shirts divided themselves into two teams without any adult organizing them. The oldest child quietly placed the youngest player on his own team before anyone protested. He cannot keep up, Lysra observed. Not yet, Lucas replied. Then why choose him first? Lucas watched the little boy nervously tie his oversized cleats. Because somebody chose us first once. The game began with endless enthusiasm and very little structure. Passes missed their targets. Shots flew over the fence. Every few minutes someone laughed so hard they forgot to keep playing. Then, near the middle of the match, the smallest boy stumbled while chasing the ball and scraped his knee against the rough concrete. Before Lysra could fully process what happened, every child stopped playing. The opposing team's captain ran over first. Another child handed the boy a water bottle. Someone else brushed dust from his jersey. No one argued about possession. No one took advantage of the interruption. They simply waited until their teammate, who technically belonged to the other side, stood up smiling again. Lucas spoke so quietly that only Lysra heard him. Our first instinct is rarely to win. It is to make sure everyone can keep playing. The words settled inside her thoughts with unexpected weight. Back aboard her temporary diplomatic residence that evening, Lysra activated the Galactic Strategic Core, an advanced predictive intelligence trusted by dozens of civilizations. She uploaded thousands of hours of observations collected during her journey across Earth. The artificial intelligence processed movement patterns, communication habits, emotional responses, and social interactions before generating a revised civilization profile. Cooperative resilience exceeded historical estimates. Adaptive recovery exceeded all comparative species. Cross-generational value transfer classified as exceptionally stable. She initiated a hypothetical occupation scenario using every available strategic advantage. The projection began confidently before gradually slowing. Local cooperation spread faster than anticipated. Civilian adaptation outpaced logistical disruption. Volunteer leadership emerged. Spontaneously, community networks reorganized independently without centralized command. The projected duration of successful occupation steadily declined before freezing altogether. Across the display appeared a single sentence that the strategic core had never produced in any previous simulation. Predictive certainty unavailable. Human behavioral cohesion exceeds measurable parameters. Lysra leaned back in complete silence as the room filled with the soft blue glow of countless stars beyond the observation window. For the first time in her distinguished career, the greatest strategic system ever created had admitted something she herself was beginning to understand. Humanity possessed a strength that did not exist inside armies alone. It lived inside ordinary people who instinctively refused to let one another face life alone. When Lysra returned to the orbital diplomatic station, the silence felt different. The polished corridors had once represented certainty, every glowing panel and perfectly ordered schedule reinforcing the belief that every civilization could eventually be understood through enough observation and enough data. Now the quiet carried questions instead of answers. She entered the secure analysis chamber and dismissed the attending officers with a brief gesture. The circular room darkened as thousands of holographic stars appeared around her, each representing a civilization cataloged by the Galactic Council across countless generations. Earth glowed near the center, surrounded by streams of newly collected information from every observation she had made during the previous week. She initiated the highest-level strategic simulation available. The Galactic Strategic Core acknowledged her authorization and projected a three-dimensional model of the solar system across the chamber floor. Initial assessment appeared almost immediately. Technological parity favored the Council. Resource superiority favored the Council. Fleet mobility favored the Council. Probability of successful first contact under coercive conditions exceeded 99%. The prediction matched every previous report. Lysra remained expressionless. Run the simulation again, she instructed calmly. Include civilian behavioral variables. The glowing model shifted as millions of new calculations unfolded simultaneously. Communication networks expanded across continents. Volunteer organizations appeared. Local governments adapted. Civilian infrastructure reorganized itself with remarkable speed. The projected success rate fell noticeably, 81%. She watched without speaking. Run again. Include cultural continuity and intergenerational cooperation. The strategic core paused longer this time. Across the holographic Earth, thousands of schools, sports clubs, neighborhoods, churches, community centers, and volunteer organizations became interconnected through invisible lines. Information traveled faster than expected. Leadership emerged from ordinary citizens rather than official institutions. Regions isolated from one another developed similar solutions without direct communication. Projected success declined once more. 57%. Lysera slowly folded her hands behind her back. She remembered the little boy on the neighborhood court. She remembered the substitute encouraged by 70,000 strangers. She remembered the aging janitor whose burden had become someone else's burden without a single request. One final simulation, she said quietly. Integrate long-term behavioral development learned through cooperative recreation beginning in childhood. The chamber became completely silent. Even the artificial intelligence delayed its response. Billions of variables rearranged themselves repeatedly before the projection stabilized. The invasion timeline stretched farther than any previous model. Resistance no longer depended on military installations. Communities reorganized independently. Essential services resumed unexpectedly. Neighbors helped neighbors. Teachers organized families. Local volunteers solved problems without waiting for orders. Former coaches became community leaders. Every successful disruption generated new cooperation somewhere else. Suddenly, every holographic projection froze. The strategic core stopped processing for nearly 4 full seconds, an impossibility for a system that had evaluated the rise and fall of civilizations for centuries. A single amber warning appeared across the chamber. Missing strategic variable detected. Lysera looked up immediately. Identify the variable. The chamber remained silent before new text slowly formed beneath the warning. Variable cannot be measured. Description: voluntary trust between unrelated individuals. Lysera stared at the words without blinking. Explain. The artificial intelligence responded with unusual hesitation. Human cooperation repeatedly exceeds predictive behavior. Individuals consistently sacrifice short-term personal advantage to preserve long-term group resilience. Behavior originates before adulthood and is reinforced through repeated voluntary recreational activity. Predictive confidence unavailable. Moments later, the warning disappeared, replaced by a statement that had never appeared in the history of galactic strategic analysis. Reliable outcome cannot be determined. Human adaptive cohesion exceeds predictive architecture. Lysera finally understood why every previous simulation had failed. The system had not misunderstood soccer. It had misunderstood what soccer was teaching. Lucas had never tried to explain a sport. He had quietly revealed a civilization practicing trust thousands of times every weekend across an entire planet. A game that looked simple from the outside continuously trained communication, sacrifice, resilience, leadership, forgiveness, and shared responsibility long before children entered adulthood. Those lessons matured inside workplaces, neighborhoods, hospitals, research stations, and military units until cooperation became instinct rather than strategy. Lysera closed every simulation window except one image recorded at the community field. It showed the smallest boy standing again while children from both teams smiled around him. She enlarged the still frame until every face filled the room. Then she whispered words intended only for herself. Their greatest defense was never hidden inside their fleets. It was hidden inside the one variable no machine could calculate. They chose one another before anyone asked them to. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 48 hours later beneath the immense crystalline dome of the Assembly Nexus. Representatives from hundreds of civilizations occupied concentric rings that rose toward a ceiling filled with slowly rotating stars projected from real-time astronomical observatories across known space. Every delegate carried the same expectation. Commander Lysera would confirm that Earth represented another promising but ultimately manageable civilization. Instead, she walked toward the central platform carrying only a single data crystal. No thick strategic reports. No military projections. No recommendations for fleet deployment. The simplicity immediately unsettled the chamber. The High Chancellor regarded her carefully. Commander Lysera, your investigation is complete? It is. Then present your findings. The enormous chamber became perfectly silent. Lysera placed the crystal into the presentation console. A holographic image appeared above the assembly. Several admirals exchanged puzzled glances. It was not a fleet. It was not a planetary defense network. It was not an advanced weapon. It was a small neighborhood soccer field beneath a bright afternoon sky. Children wearing oversized uniforms laughed while chasing a weathered ball across uneven concrete. One elderly counselor leaned toward another and whispered, "Surely this is merely the introduction." Lysra heard him, but continued speaking. "This recording contains the single most strategically significant event I witnessed on Earth." Confusion spread throughout the audience. The recording continued. The smallest boy stumbled. The game stopped. Children from both teams rushed toward him. One offered water. Another adjusted his equipment. A third waited patiently until he smiled again. Only then did the match continue. The recording ended. Silence lingered across the chamber. Finally, an admiral representing one of the oldest military civilizations broke the silence. "Commander, with respect, this demonstrates compassion. It does not explain military resistance." Lysra nodded. "That assumption is precisely why every predictive model failed." She touched the console again, revealing thousands of interconnected images collected during her mission. Professional stadiums, school playgrounds, military bases, farming communities, orbital stations, city parks. Every image displayed different humans repeating the same patterns, encouraging the inexperienced, sharing responsibility, celebrating effort, recovering together after disappointment. "You believe these are recreational activities," Lysra continued calmly. "You are mistaken. They are distributed training systems embedded throughout an entire civilization." Murmurs spread through the council. She continued before anyone interrupted. "From early childhood, humans repeatedly practice trust under pressure. They learn to recover from mistakes without abandoning teammates. They exchange leadership naturally. They solve unexpected problems together. They place long-term group resilience above short-term individual perfection." She paused, allowing every word to settle. "They call it sport. Strategically, it is civilization maintenance." The High Chancellor leaned forward. "Your simulations?" Lysra opened the final report. "All traditional projections favored successful occupation. And after integrating your observations?" She looked directly into the eyes of the assembled delegates. The strategic core withdrew its own certainty. Audible surprise rippled across the chamber. Several delegates immediately requested verification from independent systems. Their displays confirmed the unprecedented result. Reliable outcome unavailable. Human adaptive cohesion exceeds predictive architecture. Lysra lowered her voice slightly. "Most civilizations prepare for war by strengthening armies. Humanity prepares for crisis long before conflict exists. They strengthen relationships first." She remembered Lucas standing quietly beside a neighborhood field, saying almost nothing while allowing ordinary people to explain extraordinary truths without realizing it. She remembered 70,000 strangers singing together before a match even began. She remembered volunteers, parents, teachers, veterans, engineers, children, and athletes behaving as though cooperation required no explanation. Finally, the High Chancellor asked the question every delegate had been waiting to hear. "Commander Lysra, as the Council's highest strategic authority, what is your official recommendation concerning Earth?" She rested one hand gently upon the console before answering with complete certainty. "Withdraw every offensive proposal. Replace invasion planning with diplomatic partnership. A civilization that teaches unity before ambition cannot be defeated by superior technology alone. We should seek their friendship before someone else understands what we nearly failed to see." Lucas Bennett never expected to receive another message from Commander Lysra. Their official assignment had ended the morning after the council session, and interstellar diplomacy rarely allowed friendships to survive behind classified reports and impossible distances. Yet 6 months later, while standing beside the same community soccer field where everything had quietly begun, his wrist communicator vibrated once. The encrypted transmission contained only 8 words. "Please observe the attached live diplomatic broadcast immediately." Curious, Lucas looked toward the cloudless afternoon sky as a portable display unfolded above his wrist. The Galactic Council emblem appeared first, followed by a scene unlike anything ever recorded in interstellar history. Hundreds of alien delegates filled a massive ceremonial plaza on the Council's capital world. Military banners that normally represented fleet divisions had been removed. In their place stood simple colored flags surrounding a perfectly marked rectangular field covered in emerald grass. Lucas blinked in surprise. It looked unmistakably familiar. At the center of the field stood Commander Lysera, no longer wearing her formal strategic uniform. Instead, she wore a simple athletic jacket bearing both the Galactic Council crest and a small blue emblem shaped exactly like Earth. Around her gathered children from dozens of alien civilizations. Some possessed crystalline skin. Others shimmered with living patterns of light. Some floated gently above the ground, while others walked on four graceful limbs. They looked nothing alike. Yet every child smiled. With the same mixture of nervous excitement and curiosity that Lucas had seen countless times before weekend matches back home. The High Chancellor stepped forward before the assembled council. Today, the elderly leader announced, "We officially retired Directive 72, the long-standing doctrine authorizing preemptive conquest of emerging civilizations. In its place, we established the Human Exchange Initiative." Quiet applause spread through the audience. Every member civilization will create shared athletic and cultural programs for young citizens before future diplomatic negotiations begin. Commander Lysera has demonstrated that understanding another civilization begins long before discussing borders or weapons. Lucas watched in complete silence. The broadcast shifted toward Lysera as she gently rolled a soccer ball onto the center mark. She looked almost amused as dozens of confused alien children examined the unfamiliar object. One little crystalline girl cautiously nudged the ball with her foot. It rolled several feet before another child instinctively stopped it and passed it back. Within moments, laughter echoed across the field. There were no formal instructions, no tactical briefings, no lectures. Only children discovering cooperation through movement, mistakes, encouragement, and shared joy exactly as human children had done for generations. A council historian approached Lysera quietly during the ceremony. "Commander," he asked, "should today's match have winners?" Lysera watched the children inventing their own rules while helping the smallest players keep pace. A warm breeze carried colorful flags across the field. She smiled before answering. "If they leave wanting to play together again tomorrow, then everyone already won." The historian nodded slowly, recording every word. Back on Earth, Lucas lowered his communicator and looked across the neighborhood field. The little defender who had once fallen on the concrete months earlier was now confidently helping an even younger child tie loose shoelaces before practice. Nobody instructed him to do it. Nobody rewarded him afterward. He simply remembered what someone else had once done for him. Lucas smiled quietly. Above him, the evening sky slowly deepened into gold as children's laughter blended with the familiar rhythm of soccer balls crossing fresh grass. Millions of miles away, under unfamiliar constellations, another group of children had begun laughing for exactly the same reason. Commander Lysera stood silently at the edge of their field, watching a game she now understood had never truly been about scoring goals. She had crossed the galaxy searching for the secret behind humanity's impossible resilience. She found it hidden inside ordinary people choosing one another again and again until cooperation became stronger than fear. Looking toward the stars above the council world, she completed the final sentence of her report, a report that would never be classified because every civilization deserved to read it. "I was sent to study how humans played soccer. I returned knowing why humanity could never be conquered. They do not build their greatest strength on the battlefield. They build it every time they refuse to let another person stand alone." The story comes to an end here, but its question lingers far beyond the final scene. Some victories are never measured by who stands above another. They are measured by who chooses to stand together when it matters most. If you found yourself in Lysera's place, what part of humanity would have changed your mind the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy thoughtful science fiction where compassion can reshape entire civilizations, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you do not miss the next journey. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, may the brightest stars always remind us that hope travels farther than fear.